Hello and welcome to Seasonal Job Pro. On this channel, we talk about seasonal jobs. This video is a part 2 of our pros and cons, which means today we are talking about the potential cons of seasonal work. And just like in the last video, some people's pros are cons to some, and some people's cons are pros. I know. Let's think of it more like one person's trash is another person's treasure. Here's a list of the top 10 cons of seasonal jobs, or treasures. Now let's get to work. Number 10. Short term. As I've said before, seasonal jobs are by nature short term. They are going to end, which means at some point in the not too distant future, you will be unemployed with that company. So it's not exactly a stable source of income. This may in fact be a positive for you, but if you're having a great time and love your job and everyone that you work with, well, that's fantastic. But it's important to remember that it will eventually come to an end for the season. So you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. See you next year. Number 9, roommates and housing. Housing is one of the perks of many seasonal jobs. Some places will give you the option to find your own accommodation somewhere, which, depending on where you are, can be very difficult and expensive. Some places you have no choice, particularly in the most remote areas. There just are no other options. And while free housing can sometimes be a tent, it could also be a private room with your own bathroom. That's pretty great. And some companies will charge you rent, either by the day or the week or the month. It's very common to be listed as by the day, which I think is kind of weird, but whatever. Quite often, it will be shared with a roommate or in a dorm with bunk beds and more than a few roommates. And roommates. Roommates. You may end up with a roommate you just can't stand. If you've ever had roommates before, you already know how that can go. If you've never experienced having a roommate, it's not exactly something you can prepare for. You just gotta live through it to know. I once had a roommate in New Hampshire who got up every morning before the crack of dawn to do 100 push-ups and then go for a run. He had aspirations of being a military general or something like that, and heavily lacked in intrapersonal skills, which is beside the point. When he went for his run each morning, he left the door open, wide open, which meant that the cold December New Hampshire air would immediately fill up the room. So I had to crawl out of bed to go close it before I froze my toes off, which was super annoying. Now, I have been informed that I make a lot of noise while I'm sleeping, so it could have been his version of, like, sly revenge for that. But I think he just thought the door automatically closed. It didn't really bother me that much. It was only for like 2 weeks, and I think he might have had a pretty strict upbringing, so I just kind of let it go. If it had been for more than a few weeks, though, we would have had to have a conversation for sure. But probably he's an assistant senator or something like that by now anyway, and that seems like punishment enough. But that's just a very tame example of a bad roommate situation. Trust me, it could have been much, much worse. Number 8, hard work and burnout. When there is work to be done, you will be expected to do it. That's what you were hired for. And depending on the job that you were hired for, you could be extremely busy. And if you can't find a way to deal, you could get burned out before the end of the season. When you get asked every 10 minutes if that's Mount Rushmore, and you're standing under a mountain of stone presidential heads that is quite clearly Mount Rushmore, it may get to you. Or if somebody asks you, does the water go all the way around the island? Yeah, that happens. Or if spending 10 hours a day on your feet with only a few short breaks that never seem long enough, you just got to power through. So if hard work isn't really your thing, you may want to do your research before signing on to that specific job. Number 7, the location. Some seasonal jobs are in far-flung places, far away from your friends and family and your favorite hamster. You may be in a place with no Wi-Fi or even cell service. The nearest bowling alley or movie theater may be hundreds of miles away, and since you couldn't drive to the work location or you don't even own a car, your only mode of transportation may be your feet. And your only television may be a flowing river with hungry bears. If the idea of these things frighten you, and the thought of not being able to check your Facebook feed regularly gives you the shakes, you will definitely want to make sure your seasonal job has at least access to some of those needs before taking the job. Number 6, management. I'm just going to outright say it. Some companies suck. Before hiring on with a company, it's a good idea to research them. Find reviews from former or current employees and see what they're saying. Some companies are mismanaged or disorganized and might tell you anything to get you to come fill a spot. Some bad companies seem like they just treat you like a number and can be misleading in the hiring process. You may have been hired to be a bartender but end up being a dishwasher, or promised 40 hours a week, but then only have half of that. Because they often have so many jobs to fill, it is the larger corporations that usually pull these shenanigans. So it's important to know what you're getting into. Since this is a whole other video in itself, we'll be going into some more depth about this later on in this channel. But if you've had any experience with this, please definitely leave it in the comments below. Number 5, the weather. While some jobs will operate rain or shine, others can be very weather dependent and may have a great impact on whether or not you are going to work. Like if a ski season is postponed due to the lack of snow on the mountains in a certain area, there's a good chance that you are off the clock until the powder falls. And the company, unfortunately, isn't going to pay you to sit and hope it snows. There could also be other important variables. COVID did significant damage to the travel industry as a whole, but especially the cruise industry. And it's not just the ships that are affected. Many of the towns cruise ships visit rely heavily on those ships coming into port. Take Southeast Alaska. Towns like Juneau, Sitka, Ketchikan, and others rely almost entirely on cruise ships for their tourism industry. And during the heat of COVID, with no cruise ships, there were no tourists and thus no jobs. Obviously, COVID is a special circumstance, but if you're working at a roadside attraction, like the world's largest ball of twine, and nobody is driving because gas prices have increased, it's important to keep some of those cause and effects in mind. So there could be other factors at play that may be outside of anyone's control that could stipulate how much work you may end up with, and ultimately how your season goes. Number 4, the clientele. Let's face it, some people suck. If you worked on an airline over COVID, you already know that. In fact, if you've worked on an airline ever, you probably learned that long ago. Gone are the days of the customer is always right. Don't mention that in an interview. But if one of your guests wants to stab another guest in the face with a fork, well, then that customer isn't right. And you should probably keep an eye on them. So, yeah, people can be horrible at times. And in the seasonal job industry, you will quite often be working with people. Some of those people will be jerks, but not all of them. Most people you deal with will most likely be on vacation, and most people go on vacation to have fun. But some places do have a higher than average jerk count. One area that tends to trend towards jerks is country clubs, and especially yacht clubs. For some reason, being in a certain tax bracket can make some people extremely unhappy, and they like to express that unhappiness to the people that work in the positions that are there to make their lives more pleasant. We'll touch on this more when we get into the worst companies to work for. But for now, just remember, patience is the key. Kill them with kindness. Or work a seasonal job where you don't have to deal with the public, like fish processing. Number 3, no time off. Ish. While you will probably have at least a day or two off a week to go have fun and do what you want, you almost definitely won't be getting off a week at a time. Depending on where you are working, you may not get a full day off all season, though that is rare. Companies will be expecting you to work, but if you were planning on going to Bonnaroo or Coachella this season, it's probably not going to happen. When you sign on for the job, you are pretty much making a commitment to actually be available to work when you are needed. And those needs change depending on how business goes. If business is good but understaffed, you are that staff. But at least you're busy working and not just sitting around. Number 2, no health care. If your dog's doctor is the same as your doctor, you're probably a seasonal pro. Healthcare in the United States is some of the best in the world. Unfortunately, it's also some of the most expensive. And if you're hoping to get full coverage or any health insurance of any sort through your job, seasonal employment may not be the thing for you. It's extremely rare to work a seasonal job that provides any kind of health insurance. Don't be confused though. If you happen to cut part of your finger off while cutting cucumbers for your guests' lunch, that's a different story. Your company is insured for that. But general health and dental and other insurances are probably not going to happen. So bring an extra pair of glasses and try not to pet the rattlesnakes. And number 1, the money. Money is important. It shouldn't be, but it is. And it's most often the reason you have a job. Otherwise, it's called a hobby. And some places do pay well, and combined with the perks, you may very well make and save some good scratch, provided you don't spend it all over the working season. If your goal is to just have fun and gain some experience, and then saving money isn't that important to you, then definitely go have fun. But if you are trying to pay for college tuition, or buy a car, or have bills to pay, or you plan to spend the rest of the year backpacking around Southeast Asia, you probably have some sort of financial goal in mind. So it's important to do the math to reach that goal. Say you're waiting tables on Mackinac Island in Michigan for the summer, making $3.65 an hour, and being charged $500 or $600 a month for housing. If business is very slow over the season, or you just keep getting the worst tippers, paying for that next semester of classes may be difficult. And you probably could have chosen a better job. Now, that's not necessarily the norm. In most cases, you may make plenty of money. In fact, none of these cons are the norm, and some may actually be pros for you. Maybe you'd like to get as far away from Facebook as possible. That's probably a good thing. I know this video came off as a bit of a downer, maybe, but most of the stuff on this list are just things to be aware of. And if you are aware of them and do a little bit of research before taking a specific seasonal job in a specific area, they can be completely avoided. I just want you to be informed. Then you can go on to have tons of fun and make mountains of money becoming a happy seasonal job pro. So that's our video for today. Top 10 cons of seasonal jobs. Did I leave anything out that you think I should have included? I'd love to hear your experiences. Please leave them in the comments below. Also, subscribe. And thank you.